Hi there, my name's Christian Henson. I'm a media composer, which means I write music for a variety of media, from stroppy teenagers to Belgian detectives, pharaohs, misogynistic car enthusiasts, monsters, robots, monsters in space. And I particularly like space. So when Andrew Huang reached out to me to write some music for this thing called Spacetime, I said, yeah. The thing is, I'm also the founder of a company called Spitfire Audio, and we make samples. And as a consequence, I just use Spitfire samples, because if there's something we haven't made and I need it, then we kind of go and make it. It's an amazing train set to play with. But I didn't want to come across on this amazing opportunity as some kind of huckster selling our samples. So I thought to myself, is it possible to score AAA material with sounds that you get for free off the internet? Because the last thing I want kind of people starting out on their adventures in media composition is that they have to splash the cash in order to create something that is interesting, inspiring, but also sounds broadcast quality. So you'll see here that I've used a majority of Labs instruments, which is basically an endless series of free plugins that Spitfire Audio makes, and they tend to be of the quite unusual variety. So I wanted to put these to the test to see, could I just create a score, a kind of epic science fiction score, using these plugins and a couple of other bits from elsewhere. Not only that, I took it a step further and only used the host effects that you get within Logic. I mean, I even used the chroma reverb. So what I want to do today is just take you through track by track how I approached this video. I guess the first thing that's interesting about it is we didn't get a brief. So it was very much a carte blanche, do what you do on this video. And it's so strange, after kind of 25, nearly 30 years of being a media composer, it's kind of unnerving to not have a brief. The important thing with media composition is that primarily we're here to help tell a story, as opposed to just create some musical sound effects. So I first looked at the video and worked out what we were working on and what story there was to be told. So let's just have a look at it. You'll see how daunting it is when you receive a movie like this with absolutely nothing on it. Great. So to me, this looks like and feels like a multi-episodic drama series, and it's probably a thriller. So it's not a space comedy, and it doesn't feel like a horror. I think that the story that's being told is obviously rockets takes off. We meet Andrew. He's exiting orbit. And it feels to me very much like he's going on a mission with some unexpected circumstances. So for me, it's marking the excitement of going into space. And then I feel something that I've always loved, having worked on Alien Isolation and studied the scores of the Alien franchise. I think that what Ridley Scott was introduce the idea of remoteness and the vacuum of space and how helpless you can feel through music. So for me, I really wanted to mark this point, start very terrestrial here, and then go, really mark the vacuum of space, and then go into a kind of a world that we understand less. But the thing I really also wanted to do is there's a sense of loneliness. It feels like Andrew is on his own, and it's like he's the only man who can do this mission. And I wanted to provide a degree of motivation. So I felt that a female voice, a calling, would be a good texture to use. And then wanting to get a sense of the epicness of the journey we're about to go on here, and then into the intrigue. And I guess over the logo, I also wanted to get a mnemonic, a kind of a motif that you associate, something very simple that you associate with Spacetime. So the first thing I always do when looking at a video is get a sense of a tempo that's going to work for it. Now, I'm not one of those composers who believes in hitting all the cuts. I once worked with quite a well-known editor. We were working on an opening sequence for a movie I was doing, and he said, "Christian, I've noticed that you've hit all the cuts." And I was like, "Yeah, it's good boy, pat on the head." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Well, because that's what you do, isn't it?" And he went, "But why?" He goes, "You're just making my edit look really lumpy. Like every cut's like boom, 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 like that." So for me, it's all about getting a sense of tempo that's kind of working to the pace and the cutting pace of the video. But I'm not going to do any clever mathematics to hit every cut and stuff. I just find it totally unnecessary. So I settled on something quite slow, 75. You can see we're kind of hitting stuff. It's not frame accurate. And what I'm doing is I'm spotting the kind of subdivisions of various things that are happening on camera here. So we've got kind of quite an interesting rhythm. Not that I'm going to match. Doors all opening in time. And that's kind of a double time back. So it all feels, because I guess it's got kind of quite an operatic feel, this piece. Everything feels like it's working in a rhythmic harmony. Yeah. There we go. So that it would just be trial and error. I probably would have kind of sat there clicking a long time with it, found the BPM that was close to that speed, and then just shifted it around 74, 76, which feels better, and settled on 75. The first thing I wanted to do, because it feels like a franchise to me, was to create a sound that you'd hear from, like, if you're making a cup of tea in the kitchen, you'd hear that come on the telly and you go, it's Spacetime, it's the Spacetime sound. So I opened up our lab's trumpet fields, which is kind of trumpet textures that I actually recorded for this series I did called Tutankhamun. I actually made a film about shooting the score of that. It's a fly on the wall film of me filming the orchestra in London, which is well worth catching up with if you haven't, linked above. And basically it's like almost like a fanfare. Spacetime is beginning. I'll take you through what I did there in a minute. And as I said, I wanted to feel terrestrial at that point. Now, the problem with this sequence is that we don't have any temp effects in there. I have a feeling that you are probably not going to hear much of the music at this point, that it's going to be 10-9, and we have liftoff, all of that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to basically use very broad brush strokes, nothing too intricate and detailed. So I pulled up which are recorded in a small studio. So I've sent them to a bus reverb, which is the chroma here, which I also did some EQ on because it had a kind of a 2K thing that I wasn't that happy with. I'm not a fan of that reverb, but I really wanted to stick by my guns, just use the host plugins, so it's acceptable to me. Now I thought it's a bit just lumpen. It's just an accented, very straight rhythm. So basically what I did is copy that region twice and basically muted half of the notes on that one and the other half on that one, and added a bit of delay. So this is the first one. There's a real strong sense of panning there. So what I did on this one is I used this gain utility to swap left and right. So we get a stereophonic effect. And the next thing I wanted to play with as well is this sense of time ticking. And there's a great technique called Bartók pits, which is pizzicato is usually where they pluck the note, violinists and cellists, with their fingers. Bartók pits is where they just rotate their bow and tap the string with the bow. If you're going to use this technique, it's always good to call ahead to your string player or string players, because it can damage the bow, and bows are very, very, very valuable. So often it's bring your practice bows or a spare bow, or indeed provide them with a pencil to do it with. It doesn't damage the instrument at all, but just the impact can hurt the bow. So this is the sound of the Bartók pits. And then I just wanted to give it a sense of epicness with some drums. So what I did was just got up the Labs drum kit. Just your basic drum kit. And I tuned it down massively so we could use the kick drum. Added massive amounts of reverb. And then I didn't like all the flab, so just filtered off the top. And combine that with a slightly brighter one for the very first hit. Bit of a heartbeat there. There's another interesting sound that I used here is Opia, a collection of sounds from people who collaborate with Olafur Arnalds. And this is a tape warp, again with a bit of reverb on. I wanted to lay on the menomic, just plant a little seed of this memorable motif at the beginning of the piece. We've also got a mod piano on top of that, which is a piano put through my modular rig behind me. And to give a real sense of otherworldliness, I actually got some whale song that we sampled in collaboration, I believe, with the National Theatre in London. So interesting organic sounding pads. I would say that this whale song is verging on sound design. You've got to be careful about creating sound effects that are non-tonal, because you're part of a crew as a media composer. You don't want to step on their toes, but it's kind of... interesting. I also used the whale song to create a pad, which I then automated into a pulse with a tremolo plugin. So let's just have a little look at that automation there. So this is volume and this is the tremolo automation here. So you'll see the depth will increase. I'm very much a believer in using automation as a means of expressing, so you just don't have these flat and still sounds, that they are dynamic. And that's the beauty of media music, is you can turn on a sixpence and you have the picture to support it, and you have that power of dynamism. Things can rapidly change. So automation is an absolutely crucial part of what I do, whether that be DAW automation, i.e. for your effects and your volume, that kind of stuff, or indeed MIDI automation. And I'll show you what I mean by that now. We've got a selection of strings, and you'll see here, if I open this up, that there's a combination of both expression and what is in fact modulation data. So the expression is here. This just controls the volume. Great for balancing that ensemble against the rest of your mix. And then we've got modulation, which is actually timbral difference. So we record the samples quietly and then loud. You can hear the vibrato increases. So when working with strings, because they're able to change the volume whilst they're playing a note, it's really important to use expression to make strings emote but also sound realistic. As opposed to, which sounds at best dead, at worst like a synth. So we've got this part here. And then what I thought I'd do was use these things called frozen strings, which was some samples that I developed for a TV series that I didn't end up working on, actually. They felt that my approach was a little bit Scandi, to use their words. So I thought that I'd give away the samples that I'd made for that series, because I think they've got quite an interesting sound. So we've got the violins, or cellos rather. It doesn't sound like a synth, but there's an alien quality to it that I quite like. And then we had some sultasto violin. Sultasto is where they play on the neck, and the further up on the neck that you go, the less musical tone the violin actually makes, or the cello. Instead of it becomes like a, and then it just becomes a sound. So I instructed them to play on the edge of where the tone is audible, and in a technique that I call super sultasto. So check this out. Now, you don't have to know about how these sounds were made or anything like that. It just so happens that some of these labs instruments are sounds that I've made. So I hope it's interesting to just give you a little bit of background of how they were actually made. And then we've got super sultasto, but in the violins again. I don't know why I've marked it as cello. This is really eerie. And then a harmonic cello. If you've ever played or seen fake harmonics on a guitar, it's exactly the same technique on a cello. They rest their finger a fourth above the actual note, but just rest it on the strings, and it creates an upper harmonic that's 2 octaves above the actual note. That's great on cellos and basses. And I did that on the violins as well. Let's listen to that all together, but without the harmonics first. fine layer of icing on the top, just a little bit of sparkle. The last thing I did with these strings is a trick that a lot of Hollywood composers employ, and that is to put a sine wave an octave under the basses of the strings. And for this, I just use the Logic Host sampler. When you load it up, it actually loads with a sine wave in it, and it's a good sine wave, and just rolled off the attack a bit and the release, so it wasn't too clicky. So let's listen first without the sine wave. And then with. Gives a bit of extra weight and warmth. So I'm enjoying these two acts of the score here. So we've got our motivating aspect with the voice and the mnemonic, and then we've got something that's very kind of descriptive here for, okay, epic journey we're going on. I wanted to get us from A to B, or rather B to C, if you like, with something that gave a sense also of it being a thriller. And for that, I used this, one of my favourite sounds. I booked 4 cellists into a studio and actually got them to play in the control room, mic'd them all up and put them into a series of Fender Tweed amps with a massive pedal board. And I sat in the live room with the pedal board with all of these amps doing stuff live whilst they played these extraordinary techniques. And I really loved the sound of this. So let's have a listen to this slide. And I think that's something that's is really worth remembering with media composition, and it's very difficult to know how heavy they go with the sound effects, but there's a tradition in this country to go very heavy, very, very layered. I don't know if the same is in Canada. It tends to be a little bit more sparse in America, so you have much more dynamism with the sound effects and stuff. But for me, I'm very used to having very, very layered landscapes to try and creep out above of. So that's why I'm not marking any of these lights going off. I'm not doing any rhythm there because I know there might be a clonk, 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 possibly. I don't know. And whether we're going to have like generator sounds, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm really sticking to the music. I'm not trying to create music sound effects. I'm not trying to enhance the imagery. It's more the emotional sense of what the video is doing. So we've covered exciting kind of string beginning. We've got this reflective piano piece that will repeat. We've got the epicness of the journey we're about to go on. We've got the Bartok pits coming back there, this sense of time. We've got this sense of weirdness with the whales. I just wanted to also give this sense of motivation of possibly a female entity, a calling, if you will. So I employed the amazing talents of Homme Schmitz, who's one of the Spitfire composers, and she's also a wonderful singer. And you'll see that I've not applied anything to that specific track. She recorded it beautifully, sang it beautifully. I'm not going to fiddle with it. I'm not going to process it. Love the purity of that. And then what I did is just did some tracking. She gave me a bunch of different takes, and I thought, well, actually, why don't I just try tracking them? So we've got all the way to the left, all the way to the right, and one in the middle. And let's have a listen to that together. I think it's interesting, by having them all together, it gives a slightly childlike choir sound to it that I think is very interesting and inspired me to actually use some choral elements to help this sense of a potential momentous journey that Andrew's going on. So what I did is we've recorded a choir with Eric Whittaker for Spitfire Audio. If you don't know his music, check it out. It's just one of the best choral composers out there today. Very accessible and just will move you to tears. And we did some free samples for labs. So let's just start with that. I think it was just a drone at first. And you'll see, just like, oh, there's a little drop out there. Naughty. You'll see, just like the strings, I'm also using these expression and modulation controllers as well. And then I just doubled up what the strings were doing with the choir. So up to now I've been using mainly labs, but I also used this choir patch from a thing called Piano Book, which is something else I'm involved with, which is a community of composers sharing sounds for free with each other. Check it out, pianobook.co.uk. And we did this nuts thing this Christmas. We got about 900 people sang, whether it was into iPhones or their home studio or in empty swimming pools all around the world. About 900 people sent in just single notes, and we mixed them all together to create this like super epic choir. There's more male users of Piano Book than female, so there's definitely a male bent to those voices. The one thing I was a bit wary of, though, was how rich that sounds. And whilst it's great, again, to be tempted to enhance the weight of this vehicle strafing past, again, with the sound effects, there's a big old engine there. I felt that there would probably be a huge amount of rumble from the sound effects team, and rumble and crackle, and whilst you can't hear anything in space, I think there usually is that artistic license. So I leant back off the bottom end of the strings and the choir of this epic moment, and you'll see indeed that actually I've automated in the volume here of the bigger, fatter sounding strings to respond to the vehicle, not to try and compete with the inevitable rumble that the sound effects department would put onto it. And we've got our motif at the end. Something I also wanted to do, as I mentioned before, is really accentuate the leaving of something terrestrial and full of oxygen to being in a very lonesome vacuum. So what I did was I got a piano note and put absolutely masses of reverb on that, bounced it down, and just reversed it here. I also time stretched it a bit as well, so you'll hear there's a few kind of artifacts. So what's going on there? Well, again, my trusty tremolo trick. So we've got our depth here as we did before, but also I've automated the time. So no depth in there. You can see the rates changing, but there's no depth there at all. So it's just a flat kind of audio image until we hit. There we go. And there's no reverb on it or anything, so it just stops dead. Did something similar with this cymbal here. and basically, again, just took a cymbal from the drum kit, the Labs drum kit, bounced it, reversed it, and then... So I've stemmed stuff into a variety of different buses, not really for stemming purposes, but more for mixing. So you see I've got my ROM, which stands for Rest of Mix, pianos, choir, and then the 2 reverbs. And in fact, if you look here, we've actually got up some bus tracks here and have automated them. So everything other than the pianos and choir is going into the Rest of Mix. And I just wanted to do what I call a kill switch. So I've got a phaser, which is mixed in 0, and then volume automation, which creates a crescendo there, and if there's any delays or reverbs, it cuts them dead. We've also got I wanted to get the sense of oxygen being sucked out, so we've also got a high-pass filter and a little bit of bit crusher as well. And then finally, it was kind of interesting because I was just listening to the decay of the very end. And I just heard that sound and I thought, that's really interesting. So I bounced down just the whole track, the very end there, and then simply looped it to again assist this sense of time and a ticking clock, that time is maybe not on Andrew's side. Again, really weird for me to work briefless because I'm having to make up the story or understand the context. It's not unheard of not to receive a brief, but very unusual. Again, this is a low-pass filter. Again, into space. And that's basically it. At the very end, I tend to add a little standard bit of EQ that I like. I find using samples, you tend to get a build-up around this area, which can be quite bit dentist drill in the ears type of stuff. So I put a tiny smile in there, a bit of gentle compression, and some sausage-making loudness here, even though the sausage-making wars are over. When I run this down, just show that all working together. And this is just really to make it work as well as possible on a variety of different speakers. I think keeping stuff nice and bright for media is really important because, again, what I've been mentioning here a lot is the sound effects aren't on. And if there's one thing that room atmos or dialogue will do with your music sitting behind it is suck all the top end out. And what happens when you suck all the top end out is all the reverb appears to disappear, which is why this will be a lot sploshier, a lot wetter than your standard kind of pop or dance track. But I guess the important thing here is a sense of flowing narrative that is dynamic, using your expression controllers to turn and change with the pictures in front of us, and to give a sense of purpose, reason behind why he's going on this journey, but also a sense of maybe not all is what it seems. So I'm going to play this down, and thanks as always for watching till the end. If you have any questions for me, put them in the comments down below and I will endeavour to answer them. I think what was really interesting about this was that so often I'll be pitching for something against other composers, and this wasn't a pitch scenario, it was just an opportunity to see how different composers would approach it. That video from Andrew is linked above, by the way, and it was just kind of fun because we weren't in competition. It was just fun to see how differently, but also how similar certain aspects of our composition were, especially considering we weren't given a brief. And as for using free sounds and free plugins to create this piece, well, something I've always said on my vlog is if you starve yourself of resources, you become more resourceful. And what I felt myself doing was just being more creative with the sounds that I had available to me. And I'm really pleased with the results and very proud that these the quality of sounds that composers have access to for free now doesn't mean that your financial situation puts you in any lesser opportunity as someone else starting out on their journey. So all of the things that I've used today are linked in the video description down below. And this channel's all about me sharing my experience of media composition with the 30 years of doing it behind me. So if you haven't subscribed, please do, and ding that bell to be notified the next time I put a video up. One of those for Andrew. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to work on this. And here's my entry.